Hello, my name is Eric Putkonen. Thank you for joining me. Today I'm talking about bliss. I think it's a very overused word to the point where multiple things can be being spoken about when the word is used, and I'm thinking a lot of people really just don't know what bliss is. I certainly didn't early in my spiritual journey. I remember reading books like Autobiography of a Yogi by Paramahansa Yogananda. And he'd talk about meeting various saints and yogis and how they would go into bliss. And he'd talk about Ma and various other saints, and usually they were going into a trance. And he would sometimes have photos of them in bliss. And they would usually almost have their eyes roll up in the back of their head, and they're staring off space and kind of, blissed out. It's a trance. And bliss was something they went into and then got out of. And so that isn't what bliss really means, in my opinion. Trance or blissing out is not really what bliss means. And so when I talk about bliss, it's simply causeless happiness, joy, and peace. I mean, we sometimes hear the term limitless bliss, and it sounds so mystical and overwhelming and mind-blowing. But what I'm talking about has no limit either, because this is your very own being. It is the causeless happiness, joy, and peace of being, of self. And the self is without circumference, without limit. And so it is a limitless bliss, or even an eternal bliss, because what is the self other than eternal and limitless? So it is there's a lot of words and phrases people throw out. And I think they make bliss sound this just amazingly huge mystical experience that'll just blow you away. And it's not bliss unless you break down into tears. Because I've seen or read about various saints and yogis that go into bliss, and they're shedding tears because they're enraptured so. And yeah, these are ecstatic states. There are states you can get into where the joy and happiness can be overwhelming. But that's not what the eternal limitless bliss is of our own being, of self. Even Ramana Maharshi, when you see photos of him and some of the talks, I think there's a video and it said he was in bliss or he was in self, and he was staring off to space and shaking slightly with a grin on his face. And this is the misunderstanding. People point at this going, well, this is bliss. This is being in the self. Well, this is misunderstanding that he didn't need to do anything to be in the self. Didn't need to do anything for bliss, causeless joy and happiness to arise. Just living a normal life can also have the same causeless joy and happiness and peace. It doesn't involve or require being in some transcendental state. These states are temporary. These mystical, rapturous experiences come and go. I mean, even Paramahansa Yogananda talked about some of these yogis were so deep in bliss, basically blissed out, that they were oblivious to their body's needs, and unless people took care of them, they wouldn't eat. They would die. And so we get this weird mystical idea of what bliss is. Well, that must be what bliss is. And bliss is not the bliss in non-duality, the bliss that I talk about, is not obliviousness. Bliss is not something that should take you out of awareness and make you unaware of your surroundings. You should not have to lose awareness to what's going on around you in order to find bliss. If you have to escape reality, so to speak, and become oblivious to it, that's not the true bliss of your being. That's escaping reality into a trance or some kind of spiritual experience, some mystical rapture that you found. You figured out the trick to basically self-hypnotize or trance yourself into happiness. And as long as you're in that consciousness, as long as you're in that bliss, you're happy. But as soon as you go out, the world comes back at you and you're just not happy anymore. That bliss goes away. And that is not the bliss I talk about. The bliss I talk about, once found, once realized, once seen, does not come and go. It doesn't go away because it's your very being. It's the peace, happiness, and joy of self. And so you don't need to go anywhere to experience this causeless joy, peace, and happiness. It's ever present. Not that it cannot fluctuate a bit, because I think peace, happiness, and joy are different flavors of the same. I mean, it's, because peace and contentment, people kind of go, well, it's not ecstatic. Peace and contentment is not what you'd call super ecstatic. Happiness is pretty good. Joy is a little more ecstatic, and so there's a spectrum of, I guess, ecstatic nature. And that can fluctuate between, the various flavors. It could be a deep peace and contentment, and then suddenly, a flash of joy may arise, and then you'll just be happy, and it will fluctuate. It will move around a bit, but it's all causeless in terms of it's there. I mean, joy is, I think, probably the most semi-caused in terms of, if a butterfly flies by, there's a spark of joy. I mean, that's what happens in children even. There's a spark of joy. It's a butterfly. And so, there are causes, there are stimuli that trigger these outbursts of joy. Not that that's a bad thing. Not that. Instead, we should always be seeking a constant level of extreme joy that just remains, because that doesn't exist. The brain, the way it's evolved, the way the brain functions essentially, is to ignore that which is constant. You don't feel the 10 to 15 pounds of air pressure that's crushing your body at all times. You just don't notice it because it's always been there since birth. There are many things we've gotten used to and we become unaware of. I don't know if you've ever experienced this, but I remember I had a job when I was in high school where I was like a night operator in a bank. And so I would be coding the last of the checks of the day and doing the computer backup to bring off site and things like that. And they had the big mid-size mainframe-ish computer, big block cabinet, and you don't realize that these machines make a fairly constant sound. Even when it's pretty quiet, there's a pretty constant sound. And I remember at the end of the night, I'd have to shut down the computers. That's the last thing I would do. So I'd shut down the entire system. And I was always kind of struck by when no matter how quiet you thought it was, because no one's in the office, it's really quiet. If I had the TV on in the other room, you could hear the TV clearly. So sometimes you're like, yeah, it's really quiet here. But as soon as all the machines shut down, it just boom, there's just the intense silence. You're like, holy crap, I didn't realize how much noise there was, how much I'd gotten used to until all of it was removed. And that's just the way the brain is that which is constant, be it noise, be it an experience of any kind. It could be feeling. So if you're going for a constant level of joy that never ends, it will fade away. It will just go away because the brain will filter it out because it's an unchanging, constant level of experience. And that's why I find it funny when some people will come to me and say, well, I've been doing these experiences or exercises or whatever, and I've been feeling this profound love, and then it goes away, and I'm wondering, well, what happened? And I kind of relate it this way. I said, again, the body, mind only keeps track of that which changes. So if you're in a constant speed on a train with no windows, a maglev train that doesn't vibrate, you couldn't tell if you're moving or not, or how fast you're moving. You only notice it when there's g-forces due to acceleration, deceleration, turns, things like that. Something has to happen to change for the mind to notice it. And so I said, you did some, experiment or practice or whatever, and you might have, swelled the feeling of love and the heart. And so that expansion was very noticeable. It's like, wow, yeah. But it expanded to, say, another point. And so it plateaued. It didn't continue expanding. It plateaued at some point. And the feeling of it going away wasn't because it really went away, perhaps. It could have been. It's just, this is the new norm. And so the brain filters it out. So I said, you might be much more loving and love more deeply, but it's not as noticeable anymore after the initial getting used to it, so to speak. And so the trick is not to worry about the expansions and contractions so much. That has nothing to do with self. That has to do with the illusion of me, the illusion of boundaries, of separation, of center. Because all expansion and contraction revolve around a center. And the self has no circumference and has no center. And so don't worry about the experiences so much of a constant whatever. Why can't I have a constant joy? This or some ecstatic, blissed out thing. Why can't I have that? I don't suggest even trying to go for it. Bliss is simply causeless peace, happiness, and joy. And as Ramana Maharshi even talked about in Sahaja Samadhi, it's just the natural state. It's a natural state. Because in India they talk about various samadhis, and some of them are blissed out states where you lose, contact with reality. You totally become oblivious to what's around you. You become unconscious for all intents and purposes. I mean, a drug and anesthesia would do the same sometimes. But Sahaja Samadhi is still being conscious, fully aware in the world, and it's abiding in this silence and this bliss, this causeless peace, joy, and happiness is there in the stillness of mind. So this is a bit when I want to talk about bliss. Is there's a lot of uses for the term, ecstatic states, blissed out states, all these different things. It is far more simple, maybe not as overwhelming. Might sound a little overwhelming to just go, oh, it's just happiness and joy and contentment. That doesn't sound very awesome. But the awesome part is the causeless part of it. It's causeless. Peace, joy, and contentment. It does not depend on what's going on around you. It may be influenced by what's around you. You may be just content or happy or whatever. See a butterfly and there's a burst of joy. And so the joy that was always there, it's part of the continuum, the flavor, changed a little bit depending on the circumstances. But the causeless happiness and contentment it's always there. But it could become more ecstatic. I mean, you could go to joy, to an ecstatic experience of some kind for a while and come back. You can try to upward spiral and just keep joy, keep, riding it up and, almost make yourself drunk on joy. The same thing can happen with devotees with love. They just focus on love to the point where you almost make yourself drunk on love. And yeah, that is possible. That's an experience that can happen, and you can generate it. But even that, and that at least is in the right vein of what I'm talking about, because that isn't particularly caused other than just delving deeper and deeper in riding that wave of love or joy and crescendoing, basically. But that isn't particularly the point. It doesn't need to be super, super big all the time. That's not what bliss is. It's far more simple, but profound. If you got any questions, comments, please post below. But until next time, thank you much.